A very lovely evening to you, our dear viewer. Thank you for joining us. My name is Ifrah Noor and you're watching Dalsan TV. This is the English News Bulletin. Somalia has formally adopted a permanent constitution, bringing to an end 14 years of provisional governance that has guided the country since 2012. The revised constitutional framework was approved by both houses of the federal parliament and signed into law yesterday after a lengthy review and amendment process. President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud later addressed the nation, praising lawmakers for what he described as an important step in Somalia's political development. However, the decision has also drawn criticism from opposition groups and some regional administrations, raising questions about the process through which the amendments were adopted. Amina Yusuf has more on this story.
Somalia has formally adopted a permanent constitution, replacing the provisional charter that has guided the country's governance since 2012. The revised constitutional framework was approved by the federal parliament and revised into law yesterday, marking the latest step in Somalia's long-running constitutional review process. The provisional constitution was introduced during Somalia's political transition following decades of conflict, with several provisions left open for further negotiations. Over the past 14 years, Somali leaders have debated key issues including the distribution of power between federal government and member states, as well as reforms to the country's electoral system. Following the signing of the constitution, President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud addressed the nation, congratulating members of parliament for approving what he described as an important step for the country. In his remarks, the president stated that the adoption of the constitution marks a significant milestone for Somalia as it transitions from transitional governance to a fully established system of governance. He also praised lawmakers from both houses of parliament for completing what he described as a long constitutional review process. However, the development has also sparked political debate, with opposition groups and some regional administrations raising concerns about how the amendments were carried out. As the revised constitution takes effect, attention is now turning to how the changes will influence Somalia's governance and future electoral reforms.
Somalia's Future Council, known locally as Golaha Mustaqbalka, has rejected the newly adopted constitution. The opposition coalition says the amendments were carried out without sufficient consultation with political stakeholders and has described the process as unlawful. Opposition leaders are now calling for broader national dialogue to address both constitutional reforms and the country's electoral framework. The group says agreement among political actors will be essential as Somalia approaches key political milestones. Mohammed Saido has more on this story.
Somalia's Future Council, known locally as Golaha Mustaqbalka, has rejected the newly adopted constitution. In a statement, the opposition coalition said the amendments were carried out without broad national consultation and described the process as lacking legal legitimacy. The council argued that constitutional reforms should be conducted through inclusive dialogue involving federal member states, opposition leaders, and civil society groups. Members of the coalition warned that implementing constitutional changes without wider consensus could deepen political divisions within the country. They may have called for renewed consultations on Somalia's constitutional and electoral framework before the current parliamentary term reaches key milestones. Observers say the disagreement highlights ongoing divisions among Somalia's political actors as the country continues navigating its constitutional and governance reforms.
Two federal ministers in Somalia have resigned from their positions amid growing debates surrounding the constitutional amendments. In separate statements, the ministers expressed concern over how the review process was conducted and the level of consultation involved. Their resignations come as political tensions continue following the signing of the revised constitutional framework. The developments highlighted the divisions that have emerged around the constitutional reform process. Mohammed Saido with more on this story.
Two federal ministers have resigned from Somalia's government following disagreements over the constitutional amendment. Aynan Sheikh Yusuf Hussein, the State Minister for Labor and Social Affairs, and Ismail Shire Burale, the State Minister for Petroleum and Minerals, both announced their resignations in separate statements. The two ministers, who represent constituencies from Puntland, said the decisions were linked to concerns about how the constitutional amendments were carried out. In their statement, they said the review process lacked sufficient consultation and broader national consensus. The resignations come as debate continues among political leaders and regional administrations over the constitutional changes signed into law yesterday. Observers say the departures highlight growing political tensions surrounding Somalia's constitutional review process and its implications for the country's federal system.
Authorities in Somalia's Puntland region have called for international intervention over what they describe as a growing political dispute linked to the constitutional changes. The appeal follows an incident in Mogadishu involving lawmakers from Puntland and the temporary detention of a senior advisor to the Puntland president. Regional officials say the developments reflect rising tensions between the federal government and some member states over the constitutional amendments. Amina Yusuf has more on this story.
Authorities in Somalia's Puntland region have called for international intervention over the political dispute surrounding the constitutional amendments. In a statement, Puntland officials said the changes were adopted without consultation with federal member states and warned that the move could undermine Somalia's federal governance structure. The appeal comes amid rising tensions in Mogadishu following an incident earlier this week involving lawmakers from Puntland. Federal members of parliament from the region reported being detained in the capital, while security forces also arrested a senior advisor to the Puntland president. The advisor, Ahmed Abdi Mahmoud Hure, was detained during a police operation at a hotel in Mogadishu where several lawmakers were staying. Puntland authorities condemned the arrest and described it as politically motivated. Hure was later released yesterday, according to officials, though the incident has further strained relations between the federal government and Puntland. Regional leaders are now urging international partners to help facilitate dialogue between Somalia's political stakeholders to ease tensions surrounding the constitutional process.
Meanwhile, the president of Jubaland, Ahmed Madowe, has invited federal lawmakers to the regional capital, Kismayo, for political consultations. The invitation comes as debate continues across the country over the recently adopted constitutional amendments. Regional leaders say the consultations are intended to create space for dialogue among lawmakers and political stakeholders as discussions over the country's governance framework continue. Mohamed Saido with more on this story.
The president of Jubaland has invited members of Somalia's federal parliament to the regional capital, Kismayo, for political consultations. The invitation comes amid ongoing debate across the country over the recent adopted constitutional amendments. Jubaland authorities say the consultations are intended to provide a platform for lawmakers to discuss current political development and exchange views on constitutional process. Regional leaders have been calling for broader dialogue among political stakeholders following the adoption of the revised constitution. The meeting in Kismayo is expected to bring together federal lawmakers from different political groups. Observers say the discussions could influence how members of parliament engage with the constitutional debate in the coming weeks. Mohamed Saido, Dalsan English.
And finally, Somalia has distributed more than $38 million in livestock insurance payments to pastoralists affected by droughts. The payments are part of a national program designed to support herding communities that lost animals during the prolonged dry conditions. Officials say the initiative is intended to help pastoralists recover their livelihoods and rebuild livestock assets following recent climate-related shocks. Amina Yusuf has more on this story.
Somalia has disbursed $38.8 million in livestock insurance payments to pastoralists affected by drought. The payments are part of a national insurance program designed to support herding communities that lost animals during prolonged dry conditions. Livestock remain a central pillar of Somalia's rural economy, supporting the livelihoods of millions of people across pastoral regions. Officials say the program is intended to help pastoralists recover from livestock losses and rebuild their herds. Recent drought conditions have significantly affected grazing land and livestock population across several parts of the country. Authorities say the payments are aimed at providing immediate financial relief while strengthening resilience in Somalia's livestock sector.
That's all from us. Thank you for joining us, dear viewer. Kindly stay connected to our platforms at Dalsan TV. We wish you a lovely evening.